You and I in my bed. So these sometimes I'll have these thoughts, and most recently I've been thinking about things that traumatize you on television and whatnot. I'm gonna go a little bit into detail about them and some of the things that I've seen, not graphically show them to you, but just stories, where I was able to see it happen, and sometimes where I heard the warning, so I was able not to see it actually happen. So one of the first times was The View. I actually love The View. The View is one of my favorite shows. Um, not really anymore, but it was at the time. So I would watch The View, and they had these things like graphic content showing up, hoarders and stuff like that. And right off the bat, dead kittens. I was like, really? Really? You're gonna show me dead kittens just right there, like the first shot? And so I didn't watch The View for like 10 years. Like, literally, it would traumatize me from watching The View for 10 years. Flash forward, Game of Thrones. Everybody's like, Game of Thrones, it's here, Game of Thrones, right? So I was like, all right, I'm going to watch this Game of Thrones. And then somebody told me, and I heard in the media about this one scene in the bed with a bedpost. And I'm like, nope, I'm okay. And I know, and I continued watching it. I didn't actually watch that season, I think. I just kind of skipped over it and just picked it up. And I had no need to go back and watch those kind of scenes. And from what I understood, the villain got their comeuppance, because of what they did with the bedpost, you know? So I never saw it. So I think that that's something happened with something. So to me, that was too much. And then flash forward most recently, I've actually was watching The Boys, and I like The Boys. I've seen The Boys several times. I've rewatched some of the series, and I know there's a gruesome scenes in there. I know, I completely understand, and I think it's actually the chemistry of gruesomeness, like when you, particularly with sexuality and innocence, when sexuality and gruesomeness are played and together, it's just too much for me. And innocence, again, that's just way too much for me. There was a scene, and I don't want to go into details because even talking about it, the first season of Them, there was a scene, and I literally had to close my eyes. The story is important, and the story has to be told, but then the question becomes like, does it have to be told in this particular manner? American Horror Story, Circus. There was this one scene with a little person, and they tell you it's going to happen, and then they re-show you. So they re-air the same scene twice. And for me, that's an element. It's a little person, so it embodies like a child and innocence and whatnot. And with the kitten is the innocence and whatnot. With the boys, it's a sexual thing, and it's just no, and then Game of Thrones, that's a sexual thing. I think for me personally, sexuality is a really important thing. It's a connection to the light of the creator, and when you're with somebody, and it's such a fragile thing that anything can just break in such a strong connection, that when we have these things come into play and all these elements, it just erodes and disgusts the connections that we have within human beings onto each other. And I think for particularly with the boys, because this episode happened with a black woman, and it was consensual, but it happened with a black woman, and after Juneteenth, and it aired, basically started airing on Juneteenth or right after. That comes into question as well, just the whole element of racism propaganda and the sexuality, and what that means within that context. Particularly, with black women, it's been the vixen. I mean, literally, we have a character, I believe, called Vixen in the Marvel universe, in the DC universe, that has animalistic powers. So in like a tribal kind of jungle kind of element, and that's the thing that has been looked at as the for the black woman, is that the black woman is a vixen, a wild kind of seductress and stuff like that. So you come into play, and that's a whole other video that we can talk about. But then you come into play with the boys and that particular scene, and I highly recommend that you stay away from these scenes because you don't need these imagery in your mind. And then the question becomes, why are we watching this? If you knew that, if you from the first episode, I asked myself, if I were to go back in time, if in the first episode you saw what happened, And that's the understanding of love. If they were willing to do that to love from the first scene, what do you think from the first from the first episode? What do you think they're willing to erode? And do you see an erosion? Remember, like back in the 80s, like or even way before that in the 1920s. I wasn't around then, but horror was more like ooh different, and then it just gets gorier and gorier and gorier. And they're like, how much? What's the line? I guess that's my question. What's the line? And what are your thoughts about it as a parent, as an adult, as an avid watcher of horror? What do you like about horror? What don't you like about horror? Is there positive elements to horror? So, all those questions I posed to you, I truly, truly adore you. This podcast is going to be called Disturbed because I'm disturbed. Are you disturbed? I think we should be disturbed, right? About what's going on in the world and do something about it. So, let's start by asking questions. Let's start by asking questions and seeing where it takes us and seeing where we can find the answers for a better humanity. So, what are your thoughts? I want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful eternity. Thank you.